There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven. She is right, the stairway does lead to heaven, but also hell, and thousands of other places across the multiverse. I'm talking about, of course, the Infinite Staircase. Oops, wrong book. Here is the correct one. Tales from the Infinite Staircase for Planescape AD&D 2nd edition. It's also worth noting that these two are not the same book. Quests from the Infinite Staircase was a 5th edition adventure released for D&D in 2024. It updates and collects 6 classic modules, kind of like Tales of the Yawning Portal Part 2. While Tales from the Infinite Staircase was an original adventure campaign released in 1998, which saw the multiverse being slowly consumed by the malady that is the Iron Shadow. Hey everybody, my name's D, and you're watching my channel D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for Descent into Madness. You see, the Iron Shadow is not your run-of-the-mill plague. This is a metaphysical affliction which robs their victims of their motivation, their creativity, and their free will. Artists lose their creative spark, workers twiddle their thumbs, and worse still, it's spreading from plane to plane. There is nowhere to hide. Will you take the initiative to purge this plague, or will you succumb to the ravages of idle hands? Published in May 1998 and written by Monty Cook, Tales from the Infinite Staircase was one of the last Planescape products released and the second last adventure, only succeeded by the universally panned Faction War and Die Vecna Die, which was not even released under the Planescape banner. And both of these adventures served as the setting swan song, effectively nuking it into oblivion, making Tales the final normal Planescape adventure. This is also the first Planescape adventure written in a non-linear fashion. After the first chapter, you may tackle the remaining chapters in any order you like. Or don't. It's highly customizable and modular. You can run all of it, or you can just run the chapters that you like. It can be as long or as short as you want it. It can work with both a player-initiated sandbox style or a DM-initiated narrative-driven style. 1998 saw TSR's financial troubles hit an all-time high, before being acquired by Wizards of the Coast in 1999, and part of that has to do with them having too many settings. The Ravenloft fans weren't buying Planescape books. The Forgotten Realms fans weren't buying Dark Sun books. So in a last-ditch effort to try to appeal to fans of other settings, TSR tried a series of crossover adventures with related modules published across settings to try to integrate their customer base. Tales from the Infinite Staircase had a crossover Forgotten Realms adventure called For Duty and Deity, which can be used to extend the playtime. Speaking of escalating financial troubles, in an effort to cut costs, TSR restricted the production of box sets in 1997 and 98. As while the fans loved them, they were expensive to produce and proved to be unprofitable. Hellbound the Blood Wars was a premium Planescape adventure box set released in 1996, and Dead Gods from 1997 was originally planned to be a premium box set also, but budget cuts saw it released as a single book instead. I feel like if it weren't for budget cuts, Tales would have also been released as a premium box set. I don't have any evidence of this obviously, just a gut feel. As the adventure was clearly intended to be epic, it introduced a fair amount of new lore, and reading through it I can't help but feel like it was severely edited down. It's as if somebody's gone through the entire document and deleted entire paragraphs. There are a lot of awkward transitions, like how to get from one scene or location to the next. There is a part where you have to make up an entire town, confusing maps that don't relate to the text, and so on. Because Tales is trying to expand its audience, the high concept philosophical roleplay aspect of the setting has been toned down in favor of elevated exploration across fantastical sites. The Planescape Planecape has been toned down in this book, and it feels a lot more setting agnostic, so it might not be a bad way to introduce a first-time player to this setting. So what's the Infinite Staircase anyway? The Infinite Staircase is a planar pathway. What's a planar pathway? It's basically a thing that can take you to a myriad of other planes. It looks kinda like the staircase from Hogwarts. Staircases floating in a void that twists and turns and winds upon itself without any rhyme or reason. crisscrossing other staircases at odd angles, yet they never meet. The base of the staircase is situated in Selûne's realm called Gates of the Moon on Ysgard, and extends across the entire multiverse. Every so often, the staircase will reach a landing, which is a floating platform which tends to branch out into more staircases. There are sometimes doors on these landings, and walking through them will transport you to another plane in the multiverse. Occasionally, you may encounter sultry snake women with wings and colourful masks on the staircase, but whatever you do, do not walk the staircase alone. Rumour has it that the staircase will lead you to your heart's desire. So what's so bad about that? Well, it's just that you won't want to leave. It is indeed a stairway to heaven, after all. I'm going to provide a brief summary for each chapter that's relatively spoiler free and give some basic tips on running the adventure if you're just looking for a quick and dirty review, but continue watching for the full breakdown. Chapter 1 starts in Sigil. The players receive a quest to deliver an item to the Planewalkers Guild, which will take you to Ysgard and onto the Infinite Staircase. You will explore a section of the staircase, and this part encourages creative non-violent solutions as the antagonist might be a little out of your league. Chapter 2 takes you to a half-flooded Formian city in Arcadia, Formians being the Ant people, and you get to witness firsthand the devastation of the Iron Shadow. Meeting strange acquaintances, quelling the fierce guardian beast, and navigating the terrain will be a challenges here. Chapter 3 is set on a small Cthulhu-esque demiplane called Maelost. This is a self-contained sandbox adventure where you meet tentacle monsters, fanatical local cult, and eldritch horror. Find out the secret of this dystopian place with jagged cliffs and black rain. Chapter 4 takes you to Limbo. Traveling here is like wading through elemental chaos flavored soup. Your actions here could dictate the future of the Slidey and the cure for the Iron Shadow. Chapter 5 is set in Blurfield, a floating human city in the elemental plane of air. This adventure is a murder mystery. Gather the clues and catch the killer before it's too late. Chapter 6 takes place in a Githyanki city on the Astral plane, where dreams could lead to some answers. Chapter 7 is set near the Spire on the Outlands, where magic is restricted and you're racing against the enemy to obtain a key piece of the puzzle that could dictate the fate of the multiverse. Chapter 8 takes place in the chain-bound city of Jangling Haida, on Moneros, the third layer of the 9 Hells of Baator. Whether you are here to retrieve what should be rightfully yours or discover some sick secrets, you're gonna have a hella good time. And now for some quick tips on the game. Number 1, decide how long you want the campaign to be, as this adventure is very customizable and half of the chapters are optional. We played 7 out of the 8 chapters and we play every other week, and it took us a full year to complete. We've skipped maybe a session every now and then, so I'd say probably about 20 sessions. That'll give you an indication of the length. Outside of chapter 1, which took the longest because of the setup chapters, each chapter took us between 1 to 3 sessions to complete. Number 2, as the DM, you need to be decisive and commit to your choices. The book is quite rough, as I mentioned before. It feels like parts were cut to reduce the page count, so you'll find some disconnect in the material that's given, or certain parts not explained very well, or the book just expects you to do certain things that it doesn't tell you about. And that's okay. Just make it up and commit to your decisions. If certain encounters are confusing or if you don't like it, just change it. As long as you commit, the players will not be able to tell what was written in the book and what you pulled out of your ass. Being wishy-washy will make this adventure even more frustrating to get through. Number 3, exploration is the most important pillar in this adventure. There are a fair number of encounters that could lead to combat, but it does strongly encourage non-violent solutions for problem solving. The recommended level range is between 3 and 5. However, as this is written as a sandbox, the players could potentially be at any place at any point, so some of the areas may require additional caution or discretion at lower levels. The order of the chapters being presented in this book does seem to give you a steady increase in challenge, so that gives you some idea. Picking chapter 8 right out of the introduction is probably going to be a little bit more challenging. Number 4, money and economics is not important in this adventure. Outside of the very beginning section, you don't get to visit Sigil or really any cities where you can buy and sell. Factions don't play a role, so if these things are important to you, maybe set aside some downtime in between the chapters. Number 5, feel free to add additional rewards into this adventure, as the amount of treasure the adventure gives you is quite limited and you don't get access to a merchant, so additional magic items are going to be quite welcome. Especially utility consumables that could fill any gaps in the party. A potion of spider climb or water breathing or feather fall will be a lot more useful than a +1 weapon. For more on the Iron Shadow, go to the end of the video where I'll give you my final thoughts. Now we're going to flip through the book and give you a detailed breakdown. Normally I like to do it using a physical book, but this book don't come with any maps or any other auxiliary material, so I'm just going to use a PDF in this case. That way you also get to see my face, as that's how I prefer to DM, because I find face-to-face interaction helps us build a stronger connection. Also, there's going to be heavy spoilers from this point onwards, so players, you might want to skip this part, but do send my video to your DMs. Let's get started. Alright, let's get into it. This is Tales from the Infinite Staircase. We have the cover. This creature, which looks like a snake woman with wings. They're called a Lalend when it's singular or Lalendi when it's plural, and they're guardians of the Infinite Staircase. Now let's move on with the book. Here we have an illustration of the Infinite Staircase. You can show this piece of artwork to your players to give them a better understanding of the scope of the staircase. The introduction basically gives you a gist of the adventure. Now, as this adventure is written as a sandbox, Chapter 1 is the introduction and setup of the adventure, and then from chapters 2 to 8 can be tackled in any order that you like. Due to the non-linear nature of this adventure, time will pass and things will change as the adventure progresses. The book outlines the changes as time progresses in stages. As you complete each chapter, assume that the time progresses forward by a stage. There are about 4 or 5 different main NPCs in this module, and they're also investigating the Iron Shadow at the same time as you, and they're also traveling the planes as well. So as the time progresses, certain things will happen. Certain NPCs will travel to a certain plane, and if you're at the right place at the right time, you could actually encounter these NPCs and share their stories or even becoming allies with them. This page gives you a brief rundown, but each of the chapters will give you a more comprehensive rundown on what changes in that adventure as time progresses. Now, this adventure was also written as a crossover with a Forgotten Realms adventure called For Duty and Deity. This adventure also uses the Infinite Staircase and takes place mostly on the plane of the Abyss, and it's about the Faerunian goddess Joaquin. This gives you some idea on how to incorporate For Duty and Deity into your Infinite Staircase campaign. We have some background on the Iron Shadow. It doesn't really tell you much. We know that it's some type of a malady or a plague, and it spreads through the multiverse through the staircase. It seems to spread by someone who is afflicted with the Iron Shadow traveling to another plane, but there are no mechanics or any real details about that, so I'll provide my thoughts on the Iron Shadow at the end of this video. Now, as I said earlier, you can run as much or as little of the adventure as you want. There are 7 chapters beyond the initial introduction, and of these 7 chapters, only 3 of them are relevant as far as the story of the Iron Shadow, and if we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, only 2 of these would be mandatory when it comes to curing the Iron Shadow. The other chapters are here to give you an insight on how the Iron Shadow affects the rest of the multiverse, and if you want to, you can expand that further as well. So you might want to have a think about how long you want this campaign to be. You can run every single chapter. You can even expand on that by adding in additional chapters of your own. Or you could also trim it down and get rid of some of these optional chapters so you can conclude the adventure a lot sooner. So that's something for you to think about. So chapter 1 starts in Sigil, and the book provides you with a couple of different ways to start, or you can come up with your own as well. All you need is a hook to get the players to Ysgard, to the Gates of the Moon, which is Seluna's realm, where the Infinite Staircase is situated. So I went with the way that the book gave me. So I had the quest giver Gina be one of the sensates. As I had 2 of my players who are also sensates, she approached them and gave them this request. And it's just a FedEx quest. She wants to deliver a scroll case to a man named Orion Triskalia from the Planewalkers Guild. She gives the party brief directions on which portal to take to get to Ysgard, and once in Ysgard, get to the Gates of the Moon, and then look for Seluna's temple, the Argentile, the Silver Palace, and within that they can get to the Infinite Staircase. So this part can be as long or as short as you like it to be. It could literally be they stepping through the portal and they're in front of Argentile, and then all they have to do is just get inside the palace and then be led to the Infinite Staircase. This part could literally take 20 minutes if you want to move straight to the action. I inserted some additional scenarios in my game to really flesh out Ysgard, because I feel like Ysgard's a really interesting place to be, but the way the book is written, you don't actually spend much time to interact with much in Ysgard at all. In Planescape rules, each plane has additional physical magical properties, which alter certain types of magic. This book provides you with the shaded section, which explains how magic is altered on the plane. I personally like these because it gives you additional flavor and also show that different planes are distinct from each other. As your players get to the Infinite Staircase, they will meet the Lelendi, which are the snake women that we just looked at on the cover. The Lelendi are not aggressive creatures. They value creativity above everything else. So in order to show that I had actually composed a song, my party members hear the music and then they approach them and see the snake women are playing on the harp. And through their interaction with the party, they take more of an active interest in party members who are a bit more creative, a bit more artsy, and then they will ask, hey, we don't get to go out much. Why don't you tell me a story or tell me something that's interesting? Play me a song or a poem or something, you know? And that's how I introduced the Lelendi to my players the first time and tell them that they're the guardians of the staircase. They can also provide directions on how to get to the Planewalkers Guild. The Planewalkers Guild have their headquarters on one of the largest landings on the staircase. There's a little bit of lore with them in that 900 years ago that they were established in Sigil. But as the factions gained more power, they started getting into more conflicts with the guild because the guild were poaching members away from them. So the factions essentially made the guild's life impossible and they had to leave the city of Sigil. And they migrated to the Infinite Staircase just because the Infinite Staircase is a great way to get around. It is here that the party will find more clues on Orium's whereabouts. It is said that he left for a part of the staircase called the Blue Mushroom area a few days ago. And the party can also pick up some rumors on what happened to him as well. You can also get stories relating to someone named Sharvanistra, who is a crazy sorceress and also Orium's ex-girlfriend. The party will now need to journey to the Blue Mushroom area to look for Orium to complete this quest. In the book, we're given this map on the Blue Mushroom area, which is effectively the dungeon area that you go to find our NPC. I found this map to be really confusing and not the best way to convey to my players where everything is in relation to each other. After all, the staircase is located in 3-dimensional space. So I decided to make this in 3D, and I'm going to show you. So I took an empty shoebox and I recreated this part of the Infinite Staircase using the shoebox. I took some creative liberties when I made this to make the process of building this a little bit easier. I decided to not build this to scale compared to the artwork. As we use Theatre of Mind combat, the size of each landing doesn't really matter. I made this entire platform symbolizing the central landing, with one set of staircase leading up to it, so it's still the same kind of idea, but it made building this thing a lot easier. I'm a big fan of just using random pieces of crap around the house. While it looks crafty, it is functional, which is my main intent in building this thing. I also removed the standalone staircase which led up to nothing, but apart from that, this model duplicates all of the landings and platforms as shown in the map. Even if this does not look exactly the same as the piece of artwork, this gives my players some sense of the 3-dimensional space that we're playing with in this module. Now, if you've been following this venture so far, this is likely going to be the first place that you're going to struggle. The issue that we have here is that the text that's been presented provides you with the scenarios or the encounters that could happen, but these encounters and the NPCs and the enemies are not marked on the map, so you have actually got no idea where they're located, especially since this is supposed to be 3-dimensional space. And if you look at the distance, they're really far away, and the staircases are not well lit, so you should be able to see your immediate surroundings and the landing that's above or beneath you, but you shouldn't be able to see a landing that's far away from you. So for example, this point where it says sorceress in hiding, this is Sharvanistra. So we are to believe that she is hiding on this landing, and yet she's able to see what's going on in these other landing that's far away from her. Like, that doesn't make much sense to me. Also, it doesn't make any sense if you take into account how Sharvanistra is written up in the encounter. She is supposed to be observing the PCs while invisible, and then at some point she's going to reveal herself. In order for her to do that, she needs to follow the PCs in a close proximity. And it makes no sense for her to just hide here that's so far away on this landing that's not even connected to anything else. And what is she going to do to approach the PCs? Like, run all the way down and then follow them to another landing? So for this part, I've just decided that certain NPCs and certain encounters will happen on a specific landing. The party will arrive via the staircase on the top left of this map. We start with the spider encounter where a portion of the stairs has crumbled, and there's a series of spider web which forms a bit of a net underneath the collapsed staircase with giant spiders. After that encounter, the players will arrive in the top left landing. This is when I have an encounter with a group of mains, who are the low tier Tanari or demons. This doorway leads into an empty dying prime material world with nothing on it, but it's a good place to rest. As the party travel downward while on this platform, they can overhear voices coming from this central landing. They may or may not be able to see through the void. And the voice is coming from Unther, who is a human warrior, and he's doing like a military drill exercise with the mains. I've also removed the single staircase which seemingly leads to nothing, as really there is no point for the party to ever get up here. And as I've spoken previously, Sharvanistra is supposed to follow the party. And then the party will need to travel to the central landing, and then that's when they'll meet Unther. Unther has been charmed by a Glabazuk Chernari named Gerzog, and now he thinks Gerzog is a god. He's not immediately hostile, but he could be, depending on what the party does. Halfway up the staircase is a hollowed out cocoon where Unther uses to sleep in. In there is his diary, and I used it as a hint that he has been charmed just with the way that he writes his entries. So the platform on the right, the doorway leads to another world where the Mind Flayers live. Aurium Triskalia is located on this landing, and the connecting staircase has been destroyed by the Glabrezu, and the players can only see this landing when they arrive at the top platform. So in order to complete this mission, the players will need to arrive on the top platform. However, the problem being is this Glabrezu Tanari. So what happened prior to this adventure is that Sharvanistra, the crazy sorceress, summoned Gurzog the Glabrezu onto the staircase, and Gurzog has gone around destroying staircases and just being an overall menace. And he's broken off this strip of the staircase and sort of like wrapped around himself like a cocoon, and he's using it as his lair. A Glabrezu is a high level demon, and at this point the players should only be at level 3. Generally in these Planescape adventures, there's always an early encounter with like a very high level creature or an enemy, where you're not going to win by brute forcing it. So this challenges the player to think of non-violent solutions to solve the situation. The book provides you with a couple of solutions that could work. You can wait until he falls asleep, you can talk to him and try to trick him or try to make him believe certain things. Encourage the players to be creative, but do try to communicate to them that these Tanari are chaotic, evil, they're erratic creatures, they're prone to violence. So anything that's going to make them mad or angry is probably not the way to go. But any other emotion is fair game, and I would entertain them if the player has come up with something creative. And that's what my players did, and they targeted on his sense of pride. And make sure you also give them the hint that this part of the staircase, because it's been so wrecked that the foundation is not very stable, to give your players more hints and options on what they could do. So after that encounter, Aurium Triskalia will reveal himself, saying that he's been trapped on this platform for the last week or so, and that's when you can rescue him and complete the quest. So we have a piece of artwork for Sharvanistra. So the Sharvanistra encounter can be used at any point, but her deal is that she is actually completely crazy, and she has like these imaginary friends that she calls her sisters, that only she can see them, but you know, this is just in her head. And upon completing this quest and taking Aurium back to the guild, your players will get paid, and on their way back, the Lalendi will seek out the players and give them the mission and tells them about the Iron Shadow. They'll tell them what they know about this Iron Shadow that's spreading through the multiverse, and they seek the players' help to try to stop the spreading and also try to eliminate and find a cure for this. As if it spreads any further, the entire multiverse is going to be afflicted. At this point, the Lalendi is going to give the party 7 doors, saying these are the places that the Iron Shadow has spread to. So this is the information that you're supposed to give your players. The Lalendi don't actually tell them where these doorways lead to. They just give them a brief description like the Queen's Domain, the Ridged Land. So this is the part where I say, while this adventure is technically a sandbox, it's not giving the players enough agency to make an informed choice. Like, what's the difference in someone deciding to go to the Swirling Rain versus the Silver War, for example? I would have a chat with the players and ask them whether they want a true sandbox or whether they're okay if you curate that order for them. If they want a true sandbox, give them the actual locations on where these doors lead to so they can make an informed choice about where to go next. My players were okay for me to give them a specific order, and I ran the adventure in the exact order the book has listed them out. Chapter 2 takes us to the second layer of Arcadia, specifically to a Formian city. Formian are the ant people here as an illustration, so they live in the plane of Arcadia. Now the Iron Shadow has already been spread. Formians are just like ants, so they live to work and they're ruled by a queen. As the Iron Shadow has spread in this city, a lot of the Formian workers have lost motivation to work. Their city is underground and there is an underground river which runs alongside. The Formians have built a dike or a dam. However, as they've been afflicted with the Iron Shadow, they stopped maintaining this dike, and the dike has since burst, and the water from the river has now flooded the entire compound of the city. So when the players arrive, they find themselves in a flooded underground city. Most of the Formians they meet are going to act erratically, some of them are aggressive, while the rest of them are just like staring into space kind of thing. The Formian Queen has left the city as she's scouring the multiverse trying to find a cure for this disease, so there's just mayhem and anarchy spreading throughout the city. This is an optional adventure, and what happens here has no ramifications for any of the other places. There are a couple of noteworthy encounters in Arcadia. Your party will meet a non-crazy Formian by the name of Demancic. Demancic's not a real Formian. If we skip forward a couple of pages, she's actually a polymorphed Baator who's taken the form of a Formian because she is trying to access something in this city called the Chamber of Deep Magic. But the Formians have placed a guardian in front of this Chamber of Deep Magic and she's not able to get in, so she is trying to trick the party into slaying this beast. And this beast happened to be a derpy young bronze dragon, so there is the illustration. So he was born with like some kind of deformities, and the Formian don't know what to do with him, so they got him chained up and made him the guardian of the Chamber of Deep Magic. Now, as we know, metallic dragons are good aligned, so he's not hostile, he's more curious than anything. In order to get into the Chamber of Deep Magic, the player will have to deal with this encounter. As half the city is flooded, the Chamber of Deep Magic is now underwater. It's located in this area. The Chamber of Deep Magic, while it's underwater, can be used to recharge your magic items, provided that you can find a way to breathe underwater. There is also another item that they can find in this place called the Mantalavian Scepter, which is kind of like the royal scepter that the Queen uses, but the magic has been lost, and it can be recharged with the Chamber of Deep Magic. So it's worth noting that Demancic, her real name being Gundurania, is not evil. She doesn't really have a real reason to be antagonistic to the party. Her main thing is that she wants to get access to the Chamber of Deep Magic. In my game, she asked the players to take care of this guardian, the Copper Dragon, which my party freed knowing that the Copper Dragon is a good creature. The players came back to confront her and she eventually dropped her guys after a couple of rounds of combat. But eventually she just said that she only wants to gain access to this chamber. So she traded her magical star for the information about this chamber, and our party let her be. Even though Arcadia didn't progress the story further, our party actually had a lot of fun in Arcadia. There were also 2 giant crayfish, and our party had a lot of fun speaking crayfish to them. So this is a chapter that I do recommend that you run. Chapter 3, called Lord of the Worms. Now this chapter takes place in the demi-plane of Maelost. So difference between a plane and a demi-plane is that a plane is infinite while a demi-plane is finite. And demi-planes are located within the ethereal plane, and Maelost specifically is like a tiny little place, and it rests within itself, kind of like those RPGs where you go off the edge of the map and you arrive on the other side. This chapter has more of a Cthulhu psychological horror type of theme, as you're going to meet giant tentacle monsters like this one. And it has no story either, it exists mostly as a sandbox within the larger sandbox of this adventure path. The demiplane of Maelost consists of mainly cliffs and valleys. You can see that we have the ridges and the cliffs where these mountainous regions are, and in between them are a narrow valley where a stream of black river flows through. So in this place, the rain is black, and all the rainwater flows down into this stream. So there are 2 types of creatures that live in the water. There is the Valgos, which looks like a worm that has a mouth on both ends, and the Slayeth, which is like a blob with many eyes and many pseudopods. So if you want your Cthulhu-esque tentacle monsters, well, this is the plane for you. Where the axes are located, these are kind of like caverns on the side of the cliff. And when the player goes near it, they get snatched by this giant tentacle monster, and the tentacles pull them and take them underground. So here is the plot twist. This tentacle monster is lawful good. The water in Maelost is sentient and it's evil. So the water can take form like a water elemental, as illustrated, and become aggressive when your PCs go near the water. When a player is grabbed by the tentacles and taken to the underground tunnels, this tentacle monster reveals itself as the Dark Dweller, and that's when you get to learn about the truth of Maelost. The Dark Dweller, even though he's a tentacle monster, is not hostile at all. He's lawful good, and he wants to actually help the party. If the party lets him, he can actually help you do fast travel on this plane. The tunnel connects to all of the cavern openings, so you can use the tentacles to travel to any of these within like minutes. There are also villages on Maelost, and the people from the villages all have hairless bodies, and they have these tattoos on their bodies like this. The locals also have a ritual where they will dangle someone upside down into the water, and the Valgos, these are the worm-like monsters that has a mouth on each end, will bite into the flesh of this person, essentially connecting themselves with this person. So all of these villages have been assimilated with the Valgos. So you can make contact with these people, and there are some side quests and other miscellaneous things that you can do in this place. Like I said, it's a bit of a sandbox. So you can spend as much or as little time here as you like, depending on what you want to do. If your players are into the Cthulhu kind of vibe, you might like this place, whereas I don't don't really get the point of it, but one of my players was really into Cthulhu, so he had a great time. Now the book says if you come to this place early enough, the Iron Shadow would not have spread to this place yet. So what I did was let the players witness the Iron Shadow spreading in real time. So I had a bunch of Slarty that made contact with the village, and through the contact with the Slarty, that's when the Iron Shadow was spread. On the next page, we have another piece of artwork. This is the Slayeth, this blob with multiple eyes and pseudopods. The book gives you a few side quests that you can do in this place. Your players could also join the tribe and have this Valgos attached to their body, and they'll also gain additional powers as well. But of all of the chapters, this one is the most self-contained, isolated, and does not connect with any of the other adventures at all. Now let's move on to chapter 4, In Disarray. This one takes us to the outer plane of Limbo. Limbo is a mandatory chapter in this adventure. In order to cure the Iron Shadow, you must succeed at what you need to do here in Limbo. Now there's something else that your players will need to do here in Limbo, which is called chaos shaping. So the physical condition of Limbo, because it's a character neutral plane, it is constantly changing. There are very few permanent structures in Limbo. What the majority of this plane looks like is a primordial sludge, kind of like this. This is called chaos matter. You can also think of it like the elemental chaos of later editions. The whole concept of elemental chaos comes from Limbo. So it's this sludge of building material where it's constantly shifting between air, earth, fire, and water. It's not really breathable. I like to describe it like you're wading through thick soup. But because this is raw building material, it actually responds to creativity very well. And this is where chaos shaping comes in. Any intelligent creature is able to use the power of thought to shape it into something else. And all it takes is an intelligence check. Now, unless your players or your player characters already know about chaos shaping in Limbo, this is going to be something that they're going to have to learn on the spot. So you as the DM might have to actually workshop and do a bit of work with the players to try to get them to instigate something that's going to lead to chaos shaping during the adventure. So what I did with my players is that at some point during this adventure, they have to actually wade into this elemental chaos in order to progress. So I described to them like you're wading through this thick soup. It feels quite strange because part of you gets burnt due to the fire, but then it immediately gets cooled by the water because this material is ever changing. So I tell them that this is not particularly pleasant and they can't breathe in this. And then I ask, what is your character thinking right now? So through a couple of tries, my players were saying, oh, I'd rather be somewhere else than here. And I said, okay, where? Where is your character thinking that they'd rather be? And my player said, oh, you're in front of a fireplace. And that is the cue that I needed because the character is now thinking of another environment. And I asked them to do an intelligence check and succeeded. And the immediate surrounding turns into like cobblestone, like the way that they think about their home where the fireplace is. So yeah, if your players don't know about chaos shaping, just start asking those questions about your character's mental state and what they're thinking right now. Get them to give you a prompt to start doing the chaos shaping process, because without it, they're not going to be able to progress through this adventure. So pretty much immediately after the players arrive on Limbo, they're going to see this vehicle. This is a giant ball. Think of it like an underwater observation tank. It is this giant circular object with like a glass type of window. And this vehicle stops and the door opens and out comes a doll, which is the Earth Elemental Genie. If you know a little bit about the background of the doll, they're notorious slavers of the multiverse. They're going around kidnapping and capturing things and sell them as slaves. So essentially the doll has cornered your party members and trying to turn them into a slave. So I ran this as a combat encounter. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about this, but it is unlikely that your characters are going to be able to beat a doll in a straight up fight. I mean, let's look at his stats. Okay, he only has 28 hit points. This is, for 2nd edition, you might actually have a chance at beating him. When I ran this, I was using 5th edition rules and the doll was a lot tougher in 5th edition. So how I ran it was that this doll had these creatures called the Shed. The Shed is like a gnome from the elemental plane of Earth. So they're like an Earth gnome kind of thing. And one of them was secretly planning to escape anyway. So he was like, hey, if you want to escape, just listen to me and follow my instructions. So I ran the doll like he's really confident and cocky because he thought he had already won. So he wasn't going to lift a finger to do anything. He was going to let the slaves do everything. So this Shed, his name is Molk, made a sprint back into the vehicle with the players and essentially shut the door before the dog can get back in and just drove away. And this vehicle, called the Dream Diver, is able to traverse all terrain safely. And there's another recently acquired slave called Chax the Blue Slard, but he's been afflicted by the Iron Shadow and he's not able to communicate too much. But he does mention the spawning stone, which is where all the Slardy come from in Limbo. And that gives the hint for the players to go to the spawning stone. Now remember, the planes are metaphorical in nature. That means that you don't have to know which direction that you're going. You just have to have the intent in the place that you want to go, and you will get there eventually. So the spawning stone is actually a massive place. It's like a mile wide. It's similar to an asteroid, like this rock formation in the middle of this primordial sludge. And this is also the place where the Slardy are born. So when you get there, you find out that the Iron Shadow has decimated the Slardy population. As you find a lot of dead malformed Slardy embryo, as they're not able to grow and mature to an adult Slard, which has the implication that if the Iron Shadow is not cured, the Slardy will go extinct. At the spawning stone, the players will meet a Githzerai woman called Torpellen. So once upon a time, the Githyanki and the Githzerai used to be one single people, but they had a disagreement and the Githyanki migrated to the Astral plane and the Githzerai migrated to Limbo. So they're natives of Limbo, and Torpellen's able to explain exactly what's happening here in Limbo to the players. And she tells the players to look for this Githzerai named Calmfell at the Temple of Change. At the Temple of Change, here we have a floor plan. There's a series of encounters and challenges in this place, and the first one is essentially a maze. Now, 2nd edition does this a lot, which I think is really unfun. And that is like you enter a maze and you have to actually roll to see what happens. And this is the table. So essentially the player has no agency or no control over what happens. Everything's up to the dice. And you just keep rolling. This is essentially like rolling a random maze, which I think is really unfun. And I just narrate this part and say that you get transported to this floating maze and it's taking you a certain amount of time to get through. Eventually you come to the big bad guy, Flaggamore. And Flaggamore is, I guess, some kind of a spirit or something that resides in this place, and he's like bored. And all he wants is like some new gossip from like outside, some new news item to be entertained kind of thing. But it's not presented that way because he takes the form of like this giant face that you see that's seemingly hostile, and he will battle and kill all of your player characters. And the write-up just says, well, if the player wants to talk to him and provides them with some news or gossip that's beyond Limbo, he will let them go. So I will play up on the inquisitive nature of Flaggamore, as he wants to talk to the players first of all, but if he finds the players are not entertaining him, then he'll resort to combat. Within the Temple of Change, your players will eventually find Calmfell, who's now in the body of a 3-foot-tall human female. So all of this time, he's been locking himself away in this monastery studying chaos, and he's effectively extracted pure chaos in a physical form, and it's called the Navimus. Essentially is like this small potion, and you only need a drop of it. So there's plenty to go around. And he tells the party to feed a drop of this to a being of true chaos. Now within the Temple of Change is also another fun thing. It's called the Altar of Change. When a character touches it, you can roll randomly and a part of that character is changed permanently. So there is the table. One of my players was a human cleric and he touched the altar and I rolled and he turned into an elf. And upon seeing that, another one of my players was like, oh, I'm going to do it too. And he touched the altar and he turned from male to female. So that was a lot of fun. If your players see someone else doing it, they're more likely to do it themselves as well. So at this point, the party needs to go back to the spawning stone and convince Torpellen that they have the cure. Remember, this has to be a being of true chaos. So Torpellen will then show the players to a forbidden part of the spawning stone, and we're going to see this. So here's some lore about the origin of the Slardy creature, and there isn't really any real way to communicate most of this lore to your players. The Slardy are the creatures of chaos, however, these are the true Slardy. As the chaos is ever changing, these Slardy are born with like random characteristics. Like you see this one has tentacle, this one's of a different body shape, and so on. These are supposed to be mutated looking Slardy, and they are the true beings of chaos because they have a lot more variation compared to the regular Slardy, and they're locked away in this area because they don't want the rest of the multiverse to know about this secret. When you feed one of these creatures with a drop of Navimus, they'll run off and run into the main area of the spawning stone. And as they do, the Slardy that's infected with the Iron Shadow will essentially wake up and return to their normal senses before tearing this creature apart. because that's just how the slidey do things. Anyway, hopefully your party has gotten away and not be stuck in the middle of this mess. So in summary for this chapter, it is one of the mandatory chapters, and your players need to obtain the Navimas in order to cure the Iron Shadow, and by feeding a drop of the Navimas to the true Slard, you cure Limbo of the Iron Shadow. However, that part is optional. You can just obtain the Navimas and just leave. And as it currently stands, the Navimas does not work on any other plane. So chapter 5 is called Winds of Change, and this takes us to the elemental plane of air, specifically to a floating city called Blurofil. So this city is situated on a giant block of floating landmass. All of the cities on plane of air are like this. This chapter also has a different theme. It is a murder mystery. Prior to your players coming to Blurofil, there were a string of murders. They were spaced 3 days apart, and there is a certain pattern to them. And Blurofil has an annual festival. It's called the Festival of Lights, where artisans from all around the multiverse comes to Blurofil to exhibit their stuff. So the Iron Shadow has spread to this city. So how I ran the Iron Shadow here is that the festival's still going, but all the people who come here are like, this is not as good as I remember. Like, everything's a little bit off. Like the food tastes a little bit off, the music's a little bit off, the people are a bit more distant. Like most of the visitors who come here will be like, oh, there's something that's not quite right about this place, but I can't quite put my finger on it. There's also a list of rumors that you can get about the murders. The murderer is called the Gasping Strangler. Essentially, the victim has been found being strangled to death. These are the past murder victims, and there is a certain trend with how the victims are chosen. This is a chapter that is associated with the main story of the Iron Shadow. However, it is technically not mandatory. You will meet an NPC and obtain a lot of information that may lead to the cure of the Iron Shadow, although at this point your players may not actually know that this NPC is important. So apart from the murders in this town, there's also an oracle in Blurofil who's gone missing lately, and that will prompt your characters to visit the oracle's home. This adventure is structured in a string of clues format, as in you're given a clue, your players will go and investigate A, which will give you a clue for B, and you investigate B, which will then lead to C and D and so on. So as long as you follow the breadcrumbs, this is a fairly linear progression, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So at some point in this adventure, your party will be introduced to a drunk by the name of Gun Thomas or Thorn, who essentially is just a good-for-nothing drunk. He's going to pester your characters for money to buy more drinks, but if your character spends the time to learn a bit more about him, you find that he used to be a scholar. He was part of the fraternity or order, and he had this theory about order and chaos that was a little bit too spicy for their faction, and he published a book about that subject called The Ever-Changing Order, and because this book was so controversial, he was ousted from his faction and the book has now been banned. And now he's just whiling away his days being drunk every day. There's a couple of other events that's quite interesting. There's a one-on-one duel with a martial arts trainer like this piece of artwork, and it has a bottomless arena connected by these rickety bridges. And there is another part where you have to get to a floating island that's above Blurofil, and there are several ways that you can go about it, like hiring a hippogriff or operating a magical hot balloon. So following the string of clues, you'll eventually find the murderer and also rescue the oracle. The villain held the oracle hostage because he didn't want the oracle to interfere with his plans, and once you rescue the oracle, he'll have some visions, which are a hint on the other chapters of this adventure. This adventure has a great premise. I mean, who doesn't love a murder mystery? Problem is that it doesn't let you realize on its vision. It provides you a lot of clues on the previous murders, but it doesn't really let you solve them. All of the hints that you get on the places that you should go next are in relation to trying to find the oracle. But if you follow the lead on the whereabouts of the oracle, you will eventually stumble across the murderer anyway, which just makes this adventure feel really cheap. Because you could have just dropped the entire murder mystery in this adventure and nothing would change. It would just be trying to solve a kidnapping. So I did a lot of work expanding this adventure. I gave my players a lot of hints and give them the opportunity to actually solve the murder for themselves, and also set them a time limit, as in we know the murders are going to be every 3 days. So the previous murder happened the day before you arrived, meaning you have 3 days to solve this. And for the first 2 days, they will be going around gathering clues, following both the murder as well as the kidnapping. And then on the third day, I'll tell them, based on the clues, you know that the murder is most likely going to happen today. What are you going to do? So if we go back to the clues, these are the previous 7 victims. So these are their names, occupation, and their alignment. Essentially, the murderer is going around the Great Wheel. I don't tell the players their alignment, but I give them a hint, like something that's related to this person, that's related to the outer plane that their alignment associated with. So for example, we start with a paladin. In 2nd edition, paladin must be lawful good. So we've established a starting point. This is Mount Celestia, the lawful good plane. So the third one, Governor Bookkeeper. So Governor, the Fraternity of Order, have their presence on Mechanus, which is a lawful neutral plane. And then we have a hint on Acheron, Priest of Set. Set is a god that resides in Baator, which is lawful evil. The next one, Thief, specializing in assassination. So assassins go to Gehenna when they die. This is part of the Planescape lore. And also the god of assassination, Baal, the god of murder, has his realm in Gehenna as well. This lore is probably a little bit more obscure for the average player, so you can go ahead and change some of these plans, for example. Like in my game, the cleric player is friends with this NPC called Granny Gale, who is a night hag in Sigil. And in one of our early sessions, she talked about liking grey ash tea because she said that that was a specialty from her home plane from the Grey Waste. So when I gave the clue for Mirelle, who is from the Grey Waste, her clue was that she enjoyed grey ash tea. And my cleric player was like, I recognize that, that's from the Grey Waste. So you can substitute whatever clues that you think that your players are going to get. I also made it so one of the traveling NPCs, the Hound Archon by the name of Jazriel, he was also visiting, he was also investigating on some of the murders. So I had the player characters exchange notes with them, like, I help you, you help me kind of thing. And also early on in the adventure, I provided all of these rumors to my players, not just about the murders, but also about the kidnapping, about what's currently happening in town. And there was a rumor about somebody that was in town and she's trying to do something for the Titans of Kassiri. As once you figured out the pattern of the murder victims, you'll see that the next victim is due to be someone from Kassiri. When I gave these clues to my players, they pretty much worked it out straight away. They were really good at deciphering the clues. Also, at the start of the adventure, I gave a handout to each of my players with the Great Wheel cosmology of all the outer planes. So they had a visual depiction of the outer planes because I knew that this adventure was coming up. So because they were able to figure out who the next victim was going to be, and they remember from day one that there was somebody in town from Kassiri, their next objective was trying to locate this person from Kassiri. In this adventure, this person from Kassiri does exist. Her name is Jaspen. But you have to be at the right place at the right time in order to catch the murderer on the act. As I brought the murder mystery to the forefront of this adventure, my players were actually anticipating the murder. They were in a position of being able to go on a stakeout to protect her when that murder happened. At the end of the day, it doesn't really change anything about the overall story or the structure of this adventure, but there is a sense of accomplishment that the players will get when they know that they're the ones who pieced together all of the clues, and they did all the work to stop the murder from happening. That's going to be the part that's the most rewarding for the players because they're going to feel like that they're so smart and that they're the heroes. And the adventure as it's written fails to capitalize on that and is a wasted potential. I think this is probably the best adventure in this book, especially if you build it up. So I recommend that you spend some additional time to build up the murder mystery aspect of this adventure, because for an adventure that's built as a murder mystery, you need to give your players the opportunity to solve it. Moving on, Chapter 6, The Dream World. This one takes place in the Astral Plane. So there are some physical conditions with the astral plane, as this is the plane of thought. The character's intelligence replaces their strength, and their wisdom replaces their dexterity, so spellcasters generally are very strong. In general, a character's strength and dexterity will not be used while in the astral. The players will arrive on a Githyanki city called Tornev Rock. As you probably know, dead gods, their corpses are floating in the astral plane, and the Githyanki build cities on them. So this is clearly some dead god. This is a really stunning piece of artwork, and I find showing that to the players really helps you set the scene. Thanks to Baldur's Gate 3, Githyanki and Githyanki cities in the astral plane are not that unfamiliar to most people, so most players should instantly get what you're trying to sell them. The first thing that they will encounter is this image here, and these creatures are called the Shedu. They're essentially Pegasus with human heads. They're also psionic creatures, and the players are introduced to them through this opening scene. This is a Githyanki city, but all of the Githyanki have been murdered. These creatures will interrogate the party as long as the party's telling the truth, because remember, these are psionic creatures that can read your mind. They'll essentially let you go. They don't actually play any part in this adventure apart from this opening scene. They just kind of piss off and you never see them again. When your party gets to examine the city, you'll see that everybody has been wiped out. This is a military compound, so the barracks, every home, every shop. The Githyanki that live here, it's like their head has exploded. But here on the astral plane, as there is no concept of time, the bodies don't rot. So what's happened in this city prior to the PCs arriving was that the Githyanki that lived here were attacked by the Surlong. This is a monster that was introduced in one of the Planescape supplements. The Githyanki have several racial enemies. They have the Githzerai, they have the Mind Flayers, and the Surlong is the third racial enemy that was introduced. I'm just going to find a piece of artwork for you guys. So this is the book that they were introduced in, Monstrous Compendium Appendix 3. T for Surlong. So that's the Surlong. There is the artwork. So they look like worm people with these appendages, and they wear robes, and they're very powerful psionics. Prior to your characters coming to the astral, they came and slaughtered the Githyanki from the city. And if you're diligent in searching around, you'll still find that there is one single wounded Surlong in one of the houses that you can have an encounter with. Now remember, they're very powerful psionic beings. My players encountered one and he was trying to talk to it, and he gave this creature enough time to try to dominate him twice. Fortunately though, he passed the saving throw both times. So regardless of what happened previously, this is not why you're here. So while you're searching through the city, your character's going to find a well. It looks just like a normal well, except when you climb in, it's only about 6 feet deep. A very shallow well, and it contains nothing. While you're investigating the well, you will find a stray Githyanki. They were away when the Surlong attacked, so they just recently returned to the city, but they're not really interested in talking about what's happened to their people. So the girl that you meet seems to be very interested in seeing your reaction with the well. She's going to press you for information about the well and also hints at you about taking a nap. Now they're not exactly hostile, and they won't attack you when you sleep or anything like that. So at some point, your PCs will have to take a nap in order to really progress the story. So I would build this up as prior to your characters coming to the astral, you would have traveled the staircase for like 10 hours. So you're completely exhausted. And I would let them find a place to take a nap. While your PCs are sleeping, they will all have a dream, and they will all have a different one. So we'll start the dream sequence, and there are 4 separate dreams in this book. And they kind of all have a common theme. So each of the players will in turn have their own independent dream. In this dream, they will wake up in the same place. They will run outside and they see the well. They will be compelled to look inside the well, and the well in the dream does not look like the well in reality. Remember, the well in reality is only about 6 feet deep and it's empty. Whereas the well in the dream is an actual well, but it's like a dried up well. They will be encouraged to climb down the well. In the bottom of this well, there is a door which leads to a room. Each of these dreams is slightly different, so what they see in this room is different. But there is something in common with these dreams. In every single one of these dreams, the person will find an object. And when they find this object, they will hear a voice that's coming from outside the door that they just entered from. And it's like, you've been naughty, don't let me catch you kind of thing. And this voice of whatever thing is kind of like moving closer. And that's supposed to build suspense. And in the room, there is a hole in the wall. It's big enough for someone to shove their hand in, but not big enough for someone to like climb inside. But through this hole in the wall, that they can hear the voice of one of their other party members. And the players can choose which voice it is that they hear, or the DM can choose it for them. So I actually hate this bit. And this is very typical of 2nd edition adventures using trial and error. And I really hate this. And the gist of this part is the players will keep having a recurring dream each night until the right conditions are met. And what they're supposed to do, and this adventure is assuming that you have 4 players, and they all have to pass the object, regardless of whichever object it is, into the hole to the same player. So this sequence will not end until one player has at least 3 items from the other players. And when the right conditions are met, the next time that player that has 3 of the items, they'll have a dream. It'll start the same way, but in this player's dream, they will have the items that the other players have handed to them, plus their own items. So in this case, there'll be 4 items. And the items will then float away from this player in their dream, and they have to make an attack roll to try to grab onto it. So after all that, you still have to make an attack roll. And the character's dexterity determines how many times they can attempt to grab onto these items. So there's even a potential to fail. And then a giant hand will try to grab onto this character, but they can see that on this hand that there are like indents where the knuckles are. Think like Thanos' gauntlet. And these items that float away, hopefully your player characters has grabbed onto at least one of them, they turn into a gem. So they're supposed to put at least one of these gems into the indent where the knuckle is. And then at this point, a disembodied mouth will appear and starts talking to the player. And the mouth will ask them, what would you like to know? This is like a contact other plane type of spell, and you're able to ask one question and have that answered. And after that, all of the players awaken and they're greeted by this Githyanki man, and he gives the player a magic item kind of thing. There's some backstory to this character, but there's really no way to convey his story to the players at any point. So the players will be like, oh, some guy gave me a thing. And that group of Githyanki that you met earlier, the one that encouraged you to sleep, they can turn hostile with the player at some point as well because they're interested in this dream well. But overall, this quest doesn't really go anywhere. The story doesn't make any sense. It's not very fun. It's all trial and error. This is a symptom of one of the worst AD&D quest designs, where you just have to like trial and error your way until you eventually figure it out. Like, could you imagine like stuck here night after night after night and just waiting for something to happen? And as a DM, you can only say, well, you haven't figured out the magical combination yet in your dream, go back to sleep. Like, it's not fun. So, I suggest if you're going to skip anyone, skip this one, or you're going to have to massively rewrite this adventure in order for it to even make any sense or have any fun at all. I mean, I think maybe instead of having this arbitrary, like, pass the object here and there kind of thing, maybe just have them go on a dream adventure. Maybe have to do with the backstory of this guy so that you're introduced to this guy's backstory. Maybe the dream takes you back in time before the Surlon attacked so that you can see what actually happened. Maybe you can build on that. Maybe it was an inside job. Maybe the Githyanki girl that encouraged you to sleep, she and her team sold out their own people, and hence they were conveniently away when the Surlon attacked. I mean, thinking about it, that would actually make a really fun adventure. And maybe instead of having it as a dreaming world, this is like a well of altered reality where you can go back in time and stop the invasion. And then when you get back to reality, you find that the city has been saved. And you can celebrate for exactly 2 seconds before the Githyanki turns hostile on you and the player has to escape back to the staircase with their lives. As is written, 1 out of 10, but there is potential to make it better. Then we move on to Chapter 7, Reflections, which takes place on the Outlands, which is the true neutral outer plane, specifically near the Spire, near the first ring. Now, depending on when you do this adventure, the ring can shift. So here's a little bit of Planescape lore. In the Outlands, as you're moving outward from the Spire, there are rings of increasing sizes. Think of them like rings on a tree stump. There are 9 rings of increasing sizes in the Outlands. And these rings dictate magic effectiveness. As the closer that you get to the Spire, magic ceases to work. So on the outside of the first ring means that only spells of the first level will work. 2nd to 9th level spells will not work. So on the outer rim of the Outlands where the gate towns are, that's outside the 9th ring, which means that all magic works. So within the 9th ring, 9th level spells will no longer work. So as is written, the place where your characters land could be on either side of the first ring, which means either only 1st level spells work or no spells work at all. I prefer to run this adventure on the outside of the first ring, meaning that 1st level spells could still work, so your characters still have a little bit of options when it comes to magic. The previous chapter on the Astral plane, spellcasters with their high intelligence and wisdom will rule, whereas in this chapter, martial characters are not hampered by the restrictions to magic, so it gives the martial characters a chance to shine. When the players arrive on the Outlands, they arrive on what used to be the city called Sum of All. When the Iron Shadow spread to this city, it resulted in the entire city just disappearing. Normally, this is a city that would house 10,000 Romani. Romani are the people from the Outlands. There are still hints that this site is a former city, as the characters will walk past what appears to be cobblestone roads and foundation of houses. So if they pay close attention, they'll notice that something is not quite what it seems. While the entire city has vanished, there is one structure that still stands, and that is the mirrored library. So the exterior walls to this building are all mirrors. If any of the player characters tries to bash down the mirrors, their reflection in the mirror will roll to attack them, and the players could potentially be damaged by their own reflections. The trick to get inside is while one character attacks the door, anyone paying close attention to this will see that while the reflection attacks, there's a slight shimmer in a part of the mirror, and when examined will find a panel that can release the door. So I will give the players plenty of opportunities to observe if one of them decides to attack the door, and I'll just say to them, while so-and-so is attacking the door, what are you doing? Also, around about this time, the characters will receive a message from someone nearby. And this is from a Romani scout party that is from a neighboring town. They've been trying to find out what's happened to the city of Sum of All, and they can fill the players in on the backstory on what happened with Sum of All. They also mention that the only building that's left is the Mirrored Library, and if the party is friendly, they will cooperate with the party, as their aim is trying to find out what happened to the city and trying to bring the city back. So this book that they're looking for is called The Ever-Changing Order. The name of this book might sound familiar, as this was the book written by Thomas of Thorn. You know, the drunk penniless bum that your party met in Blurfil in the Plane of Air? This is another mandatory chapter in this adventure. As a matter of fact, this could actually be your finale. If your party already has Navimas from Limbo, this play could be cured at the end of this chapter. So we have some artwork of the Romani. So the band of Romani scouts can only give information to the party. The party will still need to go into the Mirrored Library and retrieve this book themselves. They'll tell the party that inside the Mirrored Library, the books are stored in square-shaped rooms like this, and each square is pretty much identical to another, and the library spans thousands and thousands of rooms. And the Romani can give the party step-by-step instructions on how to find the room which contains the book. The Mirrored Library contains every book that has ever been written across the entire multiverse. And even though magic is heavily restricted here near the Spire, this is called mirror magic, which functions normally. So as the player gets back into the library, this is the ground floor. Most of these rooms are empty. There isn't really anything very interesting. It's more for flavor. There's like different types of books. There are books that's written on panes of glass. There are books that's written like back to front and needs to be like held up against the mirror to be able to read. And essentially just like lots of different types of novelty. The party will need to climb down the hatch, which will take them into the square libraries. Now in each one of these square rooms, the four walls are made out of mirrors, and we have bookshelves in the middle. Because every single room is structured exactly the same, they kind of all look like each other. However, upon closer inspection, the players can see that the reflections in the mirrors are not exactly the same, because the titles on the books being reflected are not the same as the books that's on the shelves, providing the hint to the players that the mirror is not exactly as it seems, because anyone pushing against that mirror will actually be pushed out towards the other side and into the adjacent room. And this is how you have these networks of interlinked rooms. So provided that they follow the instructions given by the Romani, it's like take 11 steps forward and then like 14 steps to the right, something like that. Then they'll be able to find the room where this book is located. Now it's not going to be entirely easy, we're not quite home yet. There are some additional challenges in this book to throw at the players. And also our players are not alone. The library has also been infiltrated by a group of Chiton. I'm going to find a piece of artwork for them. And here we have the Chiton. This is the monster that was introduced in the Planes of Lore box set. They come from a city called Jangling Hyta, which is located on the third layer of the Nine Hells of Baator. In subsequent editions, they're referred to as Chain Devils. However, their lore in Planescape specifically says that they're not a Baator zoo, and they're a specialist when it comes to making chains. And the Chiton have also infiltrated the library, and they are a few rooms in front of you. As your party member progresses, they will eventually bump into them. There are several scenarios written in the book here that you can use. I didn't actually like any of them because they all felt really convoluted. I just designed a couple of puzzle encounters for my party as obstacles for them to get through. Because the mirrored rooms have a couple of quirks. You can only enter into the adjacent room if you can actually see it. If there is a darkness spell, and I think one of these scenarios actually has a darkness spell like this one here, for any rooms that's affected by a darkness spell because you are not able to see into it, you cannot cross through the mirror.
However, magic can penetrate the mirrors and can be cast into the adjacent room, and this is the reason why I want this to take place outside of the first ring in the Outlands, so your characters still had first level spells to play with. I just used a room where the adjacent room had like a piece of fabric that covered the mirror, so my players were not able to see into the adjacent room, so therefore not able to cross into it. But in the end, they figured that magic does travel into the adjacent room, and they were able to burn the fabric away using a fire spell, hence revealing the mirror, and hence they're able to cross into it. It doesn't have to be a very clever or intricate puzzle. Just give your players something that's going to make them think and put the facts together, and then use that to derive a solution out of. The other thing that you're going to find in this library is that the library was not built by the Romani. They were built by the people that were there before the Romani. They were called the Camaril. The Camaril are humanoid. They have like white hair and pale skin, and they dress completely in white. And they've gone into exile aeons ago, and this is completely new lore that's written for Planescape. And I don't think that they were ever mentioned again in any D&D material. If I'm wrong and they have been mentioned again in a D&D source, why don't you tell me about it in the comments? Some of the encounters included in this book are the traps that's been set by the Camaril because they're trying to defend themselves, whether this is against you or against the Chitons. When you get to the room where the book is held, there is a final three-way showdown between you, the Chiton, and the Camaril. The Chiton's also looking for this book as well. So your players have some choices on what they want to do here. If they help the Camaril in taking down the Chiton, the Camaril would not be completely happy because they want you out of this library, but they will let you leave with this book. However, there's another way that you can end this, and that is with the Chiton snatching the book from the Camaril. The Chiton are quite strong, and they can also command their chains as well, so maybe one of them just snatches the book out of their hands and make a run for it as opposed to finishing up the combat. And while the Chiton's running away, they could be trying to do things that's going to block the party's progress and following them. Maybe they could use darkness spells. Maybe they could move the bookshelves right in front of the mirror. So your way through the mirror is going to be blocked. And this is the chapter that I ended the campaign with. We have one additional chapter after this. My party members took down the Chiton and they left with the book. And the reason for that is because I wanted to finish this campaign. It was December and Christmas was coming up. And I said to my players, let's just finish this here so we can get to a conclusion before Christmas, and next year we can play something else. Now, if I wanted to continue with the last adventure, I would have tried very hard for the Chiton to escape with the book. This is the primary objective why the Chiton is here in the library, and they're searching for the secrets on how to spread the Iron Shadow. So I would make it their first priority to get that book regardless of what happens and escape with it so that it can be returned to their leader and give the party a reason to want to continue with the next chapter. Now, if your party has secured the ever-changing order, you can work with the Romani to do some research on this book and come up with a way to cure the Iron Shadow here in the Outlands and restore some of all. At the beginning of each chapter, this book provides you the way on how to cure the Iron Shadow from the plane. So it says the Iron Shadow can be dispelled from the area of Sum of All in all of Outlands by sprinkling the Navimas on the spire at the center of the plane. 4 drops must be placed on equidistant points around the spire, and it can be found by reading the ever-changing order, and there is a certain research time which is modified by your intelligence. Now, if you want to continue the adventure, you can actually turn all of these cures into adventures themselves. Obviously, you need to do a lot more work in fleshing it out, but that is the option if you really want to expand this adventure. I played them out as epilogues with my group. So we went through all of the planes that they've been to, and I'm like, hey guys, did you want to save Arcadia? And they're like, yes. And then I tell them, okay, well, this is what happened. And then so on and so forth for the next plane. This is already a pretty long adventure, so by the time that you get here, you probably feel like me, just wanted to get it over with. So that's why I just went with the epilogue approach. But if you're really enjoying this and all of your players want to continue, then by all means, expand on these and turn them into adventures themselves. Now, I didn't run chapter 8, but let's go through it and have a look. It's called A Devil's Dream. This adventure takes place on the 3rd layer of the 9 House of Baator called Maelost, specifically in the city called Jangling Haita, which, as I mentioned, this is the city where the Chiton came from. And this is a city that has every structure literally dangling from chains. So the entire city is held up by these chains that just goes up into the sky as far as the eye can see. If you ever played Elder Scrolls Online, think of the dolmens, where a giant anchor linked by a massive chain gets hooked onto a structure. That kind of a vibe. Now, the leader of the Chiton is called Quimarth. He's the one that instructed the Chitons to infiltrate the Mirrored Library to steal the book. Now that he has the book, he plans to use the knowledge gained from here to spread the Iron Shadow all across the multiverse. Your player characters will appear in Jangling Heighter, however there's very little detail about the city and no map at all, and it just mentions, hey, you just need to go to this other section. So DMs, you're just going to have to make this up. So the place that you need to go to is a fortress called Planescape, and again, this map is super confusing because we have a side panel and also a bird's eye view. Except I don't really understand what area 6, 7, and 8 is supposed to differ from the bottom story. And I don't understand from this map and also the writing on how you're supposed to get from the bottom to the top if this is even supposed to be 2 separate levels. So make something up, you should be used to it by now. Now, if the Chiton did not get the book and then you decide to come here, you can get a mini quest from one of the NPCs that you meet. She gives you a quest to retrieve a shield for a priest of Isis from Planescape. However, if the Chitons have actually retrieved the book, there is a better reason to come here, which is to find Quimath, beat him and retrieve the book so you can save the multiverse. Now there's also some new lore that's included in this book as well, and this is the site that you can see in one of the runes. So this is a Naparibo. They are a Baator zoo and they just look like fat humanoids. They're some of the lowest ranking Baator zoo, but this adventure incorporates some of the new lore that's been written for them from the supplement Faces of Evil, which suggests that the Naparibo are not Baator zoo, they're actually a separate species, and they're called the Ancient Baatorians, implying that they were here before the Baator zoos came to Baator. This is apparently an ancient secret that the Baator zoo do not want the rest of the multiverse to know, which is why in the Baator zoo promotion process, the Naparibo first gets demoted before being promoted to a different form. However, if you leave them for long enough, like thousands upon thousands of years, they will mature, and this is their mature form where they grow tentacles out of their belly. So this is one of the dark 6 secrets that you can discover in this fortress. So long-time big fans of Planescape will probably know the lore already. You might get a couple of people that's like, wow, that's really cool lore, but most people will be like, yeah, whatever. So there's quite a lot of combat in this last chapter. There's a lot of Baator zoo that you can fight. If you ran the adventures in order as the book suggested, your players should be at a higher level. So how I ran my game, I used milestone leveling. The players will start at level 3, and then after finishing chapter 1, they'll get to level 4, and upon completing each 2 chapters, they get an extra level. So after Arcadia and Maelost, they get to level 5, and then after Limbo and the Plane of Air, they get to 6, and after Astral and the Outlands, they'll get to level 8. So I think level 8's a fairly good spot for this adventure if you're going in there with the express purpose of retrieving the book, as you need to be able to beat Quimath the Master Chiton and his henchmen. Even the write-up for this module says that if you're at a higher level, you can go in there with guns blazing. If you come here with a lower level, then you need to take the stealthier approach. So with that, it concludes the adventure. If you had to retrieve the book from chapter 8 in Baator, now is your chance to restore the rest of the multiverse. So upon curing the Iron Shadow across the multiverse, when you walk the Infinite Staircase for one last time, your characters will encounter the Lendi again, and they will thank you for curing the multiverse, and they will give you a reward which is a Ring of Wish. So if you're ending the adventure here, you can actually tie that into one of your player characters' epilogues and say, hey, here is a wish. Who's going to get this and what are you going to use it for? Otherwise, if you're continuing with further adventures, that could be something that's going to serve them in the next adventure.
Tales from the Infinite Staircase is quite fun. The Planescape adventures are generally pretty good at not taking you to the same place twice, hence all of the locations that you visit have not been visited before in previous adventures. That's why it takes you to some of the least visited planes, because it's the last Planescape adventure. Most of the other places have already been covered. The variety of different styles of play in this book is also great. An eldritch horror sandbox, a murder mystery, dream sequences. Outside of the complaints I've already voiced and the suggestions on how to make them better, the variety is likely going to keep your players from getting bored. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of the Karma, the people who built the mirror library, the people who use mirror magic to circumvent the anti-magic effect being so close to the Spire. These Planescape products keeps destroying its own lore. I mean, what is the point in having all of this lore if you're just going to make an exception to it every single time? If you build your world this way, then the lore needs to be respected. If you don't take the lore seriously, then why should your players? I think it would have been much more interesting if the Kamara were this race of super strong humans that's learned to live without magic for a long time, instead of relying on this, oh, but this magic is different kind of trope. After all, buff geeks needs more representation. However, here comes my biggest gripe with this adventure. What do we know of the Iron Shadow? Not much actually. We don't know where it came from, how it was spread originally, what its purpose was, who the culprit was, and why. Remember when I said if you present your adventure as a murder mystery, you need to give your players the opportunity to solve it? Well, it seems like Monte Cook made the same mistake twice in this adventure. We can find a cure to the Iron Shadow, sure, but when we do, the game ends. Mystery stories rely on the Scooby-Doo unmask the culprit scene for gravitas, and that's when the villain will give us their "I did it because Grandma should have given me the inheritance and I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids." Or you could be more subtle about it, but it still needs a big reveal. I've said this before, the bigger the premise, the bigger the payoff needs to be. We were playing for a full year. There was no payoff whatsoever. It's strange because normally the bad adventures have a fleshed out villain backstory just executed poorly, but in this case the adventure itself is excellent, though having no backstory whatsoever, somehow it feels worse. It oddly feels like one of those scenarios where you did great on the exam, but because you forgot to put your name on it, I'm gonna give you a big fat 0. It didn't need a great villain backstory, it just needed one. And Quemath and the Cartons don't count. Using him to steal the book gives this adventure an antagonist, but he's still just an opportunistic benefactor. We still don't know who released the Iron Shadow and why. So my final advice to you, and this is going to be an important one, is to make up a villain, give them a motivation, and somehow integrate them into the adventure. You're going to be making up a whole lot of shit in this adventure, so one more thing, why not? Or continue the adventure. Remind your players, even though the Iron Shadow has been cured, they've not yet found the true villain. And part 2 will be a new adventure to find out who released the Iron Shadow and why. I personally have a headcanon villain for this, which involves tying into the crossover adventure for Duty and Deity, but that's going to be another video for another day. Thank you so much for watching. If you played through this adventure before, why not tell me about it in the comments? Did you have a final villain? And if you're interested in watching a video about me recounting my game, let me know. Remember to like and subscribe, and hope we get to hang out again in my next video.